Welcome to the Kick Sugar Coach podcast. Join me each week as I interview experts who will share the science of sugar, sugar addiction, and different approaches to recovery. We hope to empower you with the information and inspiration, insights, and strategies you need to break up with sugar and fall in love with healthy whole foods so you can prevent and reverse chronic disease, lose weight, boost your mood and energy. Feel free to go to my website for details on my coaching programs and to access free resources, kicksugarcoach.com. Welcome, everybody, to the Kick Sugar Coach podcast. And I have with me today a colleague and a friend, Siobhan Harris. 5 years ago in January, if I'm not mistaken, is that correct? You embarked on breaking up with sugar literally on your own, which is the most incredible part. You hit a wall and you thought, that's it. I'm going to just see what happens if I just break up with sugar and flour for a year, and you did it. And then eventually went on to start your own podcast called Unsweetened Sio, highly popular, totally recommend it. Make sure you get on her list for notifications. And since then, it's been 5 years, and Siobhan has not gone back to eating sugar and flour. As of January this year, 5 years of back-to-back abstinence. But Siobhan and I were just talking before we hit the camera and let it roll. It doesn't mean that everything's hunky-dory and perfect, post breaking up with sugar and flour, that there's other ways that our disordered eating or leaning on food for comfort and self-soothing can show up and express itself. So snacking, maybe volume eating, binging, restricting, the diet mentality comes back in and we start being focused on our weight and not just recovery and all those different sort of faces of our addiction challenge. And so welcome, Siobhan.
Thank you so much. And just to clarify, it will be 5 years this January, 2023. I will be 5 years, but still, yes, almost 5 years. And thank you so much. I love that we're going to talk about this today because it's been near and dear to my heart recently. And also, I think this is going to be like a therapy session for me, Florence. So thank you. It's going to be really good. And I'm happy to be authentic and truthful and really know that this is going to help other people listening, especially if you're struggling, and thinking, oh, I thought when I got off the sugar and the flour, everything would be great, and unfortunately, things are a lot better, but there are still challenges that we face. And there are those hiccups or bumps in our recovery. So, yeah.
Right. And it is therapy for all of us, because I think I had the idea that it was one and done. And because I was in 12-step rooms where I'm watching people say, I've got 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 25 years, back-to-back abstinence. And in my mind, that meant that there was this possibility of being able to put the plug in the jug type of thing. Like just like someone who's a cigarette smoker, you would just never smoke again and we move on and it's done. But that doesn't happen with food addicts because we constantly are navigating this relationship to food, because we can overeat oranges, we can overeat bananas, we can overeat chicken and almonds and whatever, right? And it's still a face of our addiction. It's still a way of leaning on food for self-soothing instead of healthier ways of regulating our nervous system and moving through life. So tell us a little bit about, just in case you're new to my the people on my podcast, tell us a little bit about your journey, let's go back, your struggles with food and sugar and addiction. Tell us a bit about what it was like when you were in your addiction.
Yeah, I'm pretty much a textbook addict here on this. And I've done the sugar analysis tool that Bitten created. And I test off the charts. I like to tell people, I don't mean to brag, but I am an addict off the charts. Started very young, like a lot of people can relate to, 4 or 5 years old, sneaking downstairs before everyone got up, getting into the cookie jar, eating as many as I could before anyone got up. And food and sweets, we had them they were abundant in my house. But for some reason, even at that age, I was hiding it, even though no one told me that I needed to. And so I was just known as the chocoholic. I would eat my Halloween candy and my siblings. I would eat all their Easter candy. People would get me chocolate for, gifts. And, when we had those fundraisers at school, you'd sell candy bars. I'd eat the whole thing of candy bars and then have to come up with the money to pay them back. So I was never as far, and of course, can look at this hindsight now, but I never was able to moderate. And it was kind of a joke in the family that I was the chocoholic and that I had a sweet tooth. And I was very active. This continued, until, almost 5 years ago, this just up and down roller coaster I probably went on my first diet around age 13 or 14. Once I hit puberty, and suddenly I was gaining weight and it was catching up with me. And I had a friend that started binging, and I was like, nope, not going to do that. Or not binging, purging. Yeah. After a binge. And I was like, no, that doesn't work for me. And so I started dieting. And at the time it was all about low fat and calorie restriction. And then I was like losing weight, but then that would last a few weeks and then I'd go off the way. It was just started that diet binge cycle, just a roller coaster up and down. So like for decades. So that's just kind of the real overview highlight of it. I went and got all kinds of treatment. I tried every diet known to man, from being a vegan to being a carnivore. I tried like every exercise program. I was doing CrossFit and the Whole30, and, watching people around me feel really better. Like after like a 10-day sugar detox, I'd feel like crap. So I really started to believe like, well, no, I really need sugar. Like some people, yeah, maybe they are better off without it, but I'm like the one exception that I actually need sugar. And I started, hearing about sugar addiction, but I kept leaning into moderation because still, right, it's not medically recognized. So I thought I had binge eating disorder. I went to therapy around that. Did all the things like the weird stuff, supplements, diet pills, hypnosis, but then also real binge eating therapy. And every time moderation came up for that. And of course, moderation sounds so much better than giving up your drug. So I would white knuckle that moderation, trying to make it happen. Like one of the last things I tried was an intuitive eating counselor from the book Intuitive Eating, when they're like, and it says like in the front of that book, there is no such thing as food, and I tried that for months and months and nothing. And then I read this article finally on like healthline.net. And it was one of those things, Florence, where no new information, but everything just rearranging itself in the right way at the right time, hitting me like that I had to pay attention. It was all the puzzle pieces lining up from all the other, like I know I never would have gotten there without all the other things I went through first. But basically the article was like a drug addict who had gotten off drugs and then turned to sugar, and said that sugar was harder to give up than heroin. And for anything, when it's an addiction, you have to do abstinence. That's the only thing. You're not going to ask an alcoholic to moderate. You're not going to ask a drug addict to moderate. It's abstinence. And for sugar, it has to be all sugar, all flour. And it has to be like a good amount of time. And that's when in my own head, I came up with this year. I was like, you have to give it a full year. Just intuitively, I knew I had been messing up for, at this point I'm 38. And I'm like, there's no way, if I've been doing this since I was like born, basically, that this is going to be a 30-day, even a 90-day fix. I committed to the full year. And every day I wrote down in my journal to talk about how I was feeling. And you mentioned in my intro, yes, I did it on my own, but I don't recommend that. At the time, I didn't resonate with a 12-step program. I didn't resonate with anything that I could find. I think the big difference between now and then is how many more coaches and support there is out there. You can find your group. I would have been, and maybe I wouldn't have had to white knuckle it as much as I did in the beginning if I had that group of support and the resources that are available now. So I will say that. And just being around other like-minded people and having that community, again, I felt so on my own. But what kept me accountable was writing in this journal every day, because I thought I was going to turn that into a book. Mm-hmm. And I wanted a book that talked about the day-to-day process of someone giving up sugar, not just like, this is why it's good and this is what happens. And yeah, you have a few bad days. I wanted to really read someone's year, like life story. So that's what I created. But after my year, I found, the book was really hard for me to put together, but a podcast, and I did my first episode on my 1-year sugarversary, was just natural for me. I'm much more a speaker than a writer. So I will say, honestly, if I hadn't been writing every day for this audience that I thought was going to read my book, but now has become my podcast community, that was the accountability and community that I needed. And I knew I was like creating it. And now that's what keeps me, fast forward now from this really hard year that I've had this past year. I think part of not falling off the wagon completely with the sugar and the flour is having my podcast and this community, the group coaching I do, that keeps me accountable. So I will say that. So that's like my very basic story, in a nutshell. And there, I go into depth a lot more on my podcast if you want to really hear like the nitty gritty, but that's kind of the overall, point where I read that article and I just knew like I have to give it a full year. And it took about 5 months before I felt some changes. And by 9 months, I knew there was no going back. I actually think that's when I did the first like Kick Sugar Summit. I was just about at a year. And I knew with confidence that there was no going back. And we've talked before, Florence, I'm also certified in the Emotion Code and Body Code. And for me, that was a big point of my recovery as I learned and still is when I'm navigating these emotions that come up that I used to eat about, like I didn't know what to do with all these feelings. About a year into the journey, I was feeling good. I had lost weight, but I was really struggling emotionally. So that's when I was introduced to the Emotion Code. And that has been a tool. I think we all have to build our toolkit of what works for us. And it's not just one thing. I mean, what I have to do to get out of bed every morning and have a good day, it's a whole list. But Emotion Code for me and the Body Code now is such a big part of that and has been like a huge, huge gift in my recovery and helping me get through this past year with the kind of hiccups that I've had.
Incredible. If we go back to that day when you read that healthline.net article, and it wasn't new information, but it just landed finally, like something awakened, and you just had the total clarity of mind. I need to do this. I need to be abstinent, and I need to do it for long enough to really have this shift so I could get a perspective. I can always go back, but I need to do it long enough so that I can make an informed decision about which way I want to live, right? With or without sugar. And do you remember at that time, even before you read the article, had you been saying prayers? Were you desperate? Was there a primal fear that you were killing yourself or something bad was going to happen? Like, what brought you to that readiness?
Not about I wasn't like worried about like really killing myself, even though, yes, now I can see that. For me, it was really about the weight because I was just so unhappy in my body and just this mental struggle and warfare of what I'm going to eat, not eat. Like I just knew that was taking up way too much of my time and energy. And I had 2 young kids. That was really hard for me to get pregnant. Then I have these 2 young kids and I wanted to do better for them. I didn't want them to like witness me struggling and feeling like I didn't want to have bad body image in front of them and give them these same issues. And yeah, I said, do it a year. If it doesn't work, you can binge your head off for like the rest of your life. Like that was like the, what I'm telling myself to make it, at least give it a try. And if it doesn't work, but yeah, you're right. It had to hit at that same time. But I went through a grieving process. I probably read that article in October and didn't go sugar and flour free until like January. And I had to go through a big grieving process because I realized what a crutch it had been for me. And I say this in some of my interviews. There's that James Blunt song, Goodbye, My Lover.
Yes.
Goodbye, My Friend.
Yes.
I heard that for the first time and thought about sugar and had a huge emotional breakdown, just crying, sobbing. And I really had to give into that grief the first few months of really making the intention, like with intention, that I'm giving up a friend in a way, a lover, like someone that I have been able to rely on, even though I knew it was an unhealthy relationship. So yes, I was worried and motivated though by my health and just aging, thinking, okay, I'm getting older and I want to age with grace and as healthfully as possible, but I was really most tired of the up and down. Like I had every size in my closet of clothes. Like you could have walked, it was like a Macy's, like what size are you looking for? Because I just was up and down all the time.
Yeah. Oh man, you capture this so well. I love it. Okay. Wonderful. Okay, so January comes around, you're ready, you're going to do a full year, you rip the Band-Aid off, and a year elapses, and then you start your podcast, and all of a sudden you start to have that extra support and connection, and people on this journey, you meet people like you and I, and right, we start to find each other, people that are in this space who've been called to work in this space, to pass on the gift of abstinence and our own recovery to others. And then you're moving along, and in the meantime, your life continues to experience the highs and lows that all lives do. And this past year was particularly difficult for you. Is it private to share what you went through?
Yeah, no, I'll share, without a lot of detail, but I haven't even said this, publicly yet, just kind of keeping privacy for, my husband and kids, but I am in the process of a divorce right now. And that has been obviously the last few years. So, but we're kind of in the stage of finalizing it, but it's been brutal, even though it's been amicable and, probably even amicable, though it's just brutal to go through. I think no one gets married like, oh, I hope I get divorced one day. No one wants to. My kids are 7 and 9. I didn't, want to, have my kids experience this. So that's been a really big part personally. But then on the other side of that too, I'm 43, and around age 42, I talk about this on the podcast with some hormone experts I have on. That's one of like the magic years, 42. And it was like, I'm sorry to say that, but it just like started falling apart. And I thought, what is happening? Like my body started changing. I started gaining weight, but well, not that I know for sure. I could just tell by the way my clothes fit. And I had a friend that, and a lot of my friends were saying the same thing, and, not addicts. And my one friend was like, it's like my body's decided to rearrange itself and not ask for my permission. And that's what it felt like. Like suddenly shirts were tight in my arms or my legs. It was just weird. And I realized, I'm in perimenopause. So with these two things together that really have kind of shaken, my recovery program a lot. I think even one of those alone is a lot, or even just being a mom to 2 young kids or being a mom at all. There's so much that we're dealing with on a day-to-day, but those things all together really, yes, challenged me and my recovery. Even more, I'd say the only other maybe like, although I really didn't relapse then, but was during the beginning of COVID, I had a moment in the grocery store when I was panicked because like all the organic meat was like sold out. And I was like, oh my gosh. And I live in Portland, Oregon. I hear that didn't happen everywhere. It was more like the processed food was sold out, but I was having a hard time finding like the good food. And I was like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? And I picked up like this chocolate bar, and I remember like smelling it and being like, I could just eat this right now and just go through this whole thing, having that support and comfort. But how would I feel on the other end of it? So I put that chocolate bar back down. I reached out to Bitten Johnson and was like, I need help. And she helped me get, back on track. So I think that's one of the things is realizing when you do need help and reaching out for help, which I do now have, as you pointed out, this like community, to come to. But yes, that was also a moment that I look at in my recovery where I had to make a choice. And I am so grateful now that I made the choice I did, because I came out of COVID a lot stronger, fitter, healthier compared to a lot of other people that really leaned into those substances, whatever it was, to really numb themselves. And I knew it was going to be harder. It wasn't going to be easy, but I made the conscious decision. I realized it's a choice I can make. Sure, you want to go do this? You can. But I remembered what it looked like before. And I'm like, no, I'm not going back there.
Yes. It's so easy to forget the pain and the suffering when we're in the addiction, because our addict brain glamorizes it. It's like this fantasy of, remember the days when we could binge eat chocolate? Like it was some sort of the glory days, the happy days. And you think, what are you talking about? I was miserable. I was suicidal. I was fat. I was miserable. I wasn't the mother I wanted to be. Like, what a bunch of lies, right? But it's this veil of, I don't even know what it does. I'm not sure what the word is. It's almost coming. Not glamorizing. sort of, anyways, whatever, you get it, right? Like it just sort of rose-colored glasses version of what it was like when we were in our addiction, and how good it was to be carefree, and we could eat whatever we want. We could eat like other people. And you're just like, that's insanity. You had that moment of being able to sort of catch it and go, that's a lie. That is not going to make me feel better. That is not taking me into a happier, better future. That is. I'm going to ask you a really cheeky question, and feel free to take a pass on it. One of the reasons men and women get ready, I think, to sort of hit this wall, and they're ready to break up with sugar and flour and to become whole food men and women, is that the vibration of the foods that are processed are very, very low. And when our moods are low, they're a perfect match. And as we move forward, wanting to take our lives to the next level, there's this unconscious awareness that the food we're eating is holding us down. It's the vibrational match isn't there anymore. And so we start to eat better, more organic, and right. And that it just sooner or later, this food has to fall away because it's not a vibrational match. And I'm wondering, and this is where it gets cheeky, in the back of my head, I'm so sorry that you're going through a divorce. I've been through breakups where it was so painful. I busted blood vessels in my eyes crying. Like it was just so, even though it's amicable for you, and I'm glad to hear it is, I know how painful it is. And I'm wondering, as you've walked this journey of recovery, as you've been just up-leveling your life, dropping the low vibrational foods in particular, if we're just focusing on that piece, getting higher and higher quality foods and higher vibrational foods in to match your, right? And you just keep leveling up. At some point, did you up level, or like, did the vibrational match of you and your husband do this?
Yeah, I definitely think so. And I've thought about that. And I don't think I've changed who I am as a person of going sugar and flour free, but I think I got back to who I really am at my core, like my authentic self that was kind of in hiding for a while, right? So that's what I'd say, like recovery to me feels like I've turned up this light inside of me and I'm just shining. The windows are rolled down, the music's turned up, the lights are full blast. Like that's me now. And that's not how I met my husband when we met. Like I was a totally different person. So yes, I think that my recovery and that maybe it's a good way to put it, just at different vibrations of energy, not lower necessarily, just different. And it changed a lot the things like that we used to like to do together that maybe were food centric that no longer align either. Like I'm finding new things that I really like to do that have nothing to do with food. So it is something that, yes, I definitely think, and people will tell me you're like a different person in a lot of ways, where I personally know, no, that's pretty true to who I am. It's just been covered up for so long.
Got it. Yeah, because I clearly recall when I was about to do this abstinence piece, I remember being afraid that somehow would impact my marriage. That I was afraid that somehow maybe, I don't know, there wasn't even quite words. It was just a feeling of fear that I might go next level and my husband might not come with me, and it might create some space between us that would have been deeply painful. And I remember having a conversation with him, and I remember him looking at me like, that's insane. That's insane, honey. Like we are here as life partners to cheer each other on, to go to next levels, to get more growth, more healing, more thriving, more love. The better you feel, the better I have as a life partner, right? And we might not up level at the same ways at the same time, and maybe, right? But yeah, do not hold yourself back, because we will have a better marriage by you stepping more. And it was very reassuring, and I know I was able to move on. But I wondered, if that happened, it's just a reality.
Well, and I think that's pretty common, both sides of this, just like no recovery is the same. It's not like everyone that gets sugar-free is going to decide they need a divorce, or, it's so different for everyone what comes up. Because again, I remember talking to Bitten Johnson, who I really lean on when I'm struggling. And she said, because of all the addicts she's worked with, she said it happens a lot she sees a lot of divorce because the other partner maybe isn't ready to evolve with that other person. And for your own growth, you have to kind of let go and keep going. So I do think, there are examples of that, but examples like you too, where it doesn't have to be like that. So I don't want people to feel scared about that. I think it just is something in all relationships too. To really be long lasting, addiction or not, you need to be able to grow and evolve together, in a way that you both, like you're saying, might not be at the same time, but you're at least holding space for that person. So, yeah. And I think whenever you go through something like addiction or any kind of big self growth, journey, there is time for reflection and all of that. And I think for some people, it might not be your significant partner, like your, significant other, but it might be another relationship. I hear that from my clients a lot, that it's like a parent that they have to that they find is no longer kind of resonating with them, and it's kind of become toxic. Or whatever it might be, or a good friend that might have been their eating buddy, and their friend just can't get on board with them, living this healthier lifestyle or whatever. So I do think sometimes that does happen in our life. We're looking at all those relationships, not just significant others, but friends, family, all of that stuff. I think it does change and shift a little bit.
Yeah. Yes. So in terms of your relationship with food since breaking up with sugar and flour, that is held steady. That's a solid line. That's a no-go. But there's other ways that compulsive eating and sort of leaning on food for comfort has showed up in your life, particularly in the last year. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, for me, it's been snacking. And I haven't like thought about this a lot, but when you were talking in the beginning about like you can overeat on oranges or whatever, the other thing that came up for me, and here they are right here, is bananas. So bananas for me, and I knew this from a while ago, even before I went sugar and flour free, I did like a food sensitivity testing. First of all, sugar came up as being extremely sensitive to sugar. So I knew this for a long time, even before I, went sugar and flour free. But the only other two things that came up were bananas and pineapples. So I stopped eating, both of those things for a really long time. It was easier to give up bananas and pineapples than it was sugar, And so this past year, it's kind of interesting as I've started like maybe snacking a little bit more, but the bananas came back into play, which I had kind of forgotten about. And it all started because this summer I was visiting a friend, and her husband made this really good chia seed pudding. And for me, I don't do any kind of like desserts, or like people are always like, well, what do you do for dessert now? I'm like, I don't. I just like to eat like my real whole food meal. Like I don't need any kind of dessert. That's, I think, part of my success. I'm not trying to replace anything. And but we had this chia seed pudding for breakfast, and he made it with a banana. And I'm like, that little bit. And I always like kind of muscle test on my, that's okay, like this little bit. But then I found I was starting to incorporate at home the chia seed pudding more and more frequently. Like if it was something maybe I did once a week, I think my body would have been fine. But then I was doing it more and more frequently. Part of it was the ease of how fast it was to blend it up in the morning or prepare it the night before versus when I make like eggs or whatever else. But I think that I also was obviously getting something probably out of that banana. So I realized once I kind of recognized that, I realized, oh, I got to take it out completely again. So that's where I am. Again, I have bananas right here because my kids eat them. But I knew for myself, that was like a hard no. And that's usually when they start talking to you. Like, that's what I tell. Everyone's different on this stuff. So when I talk to my clients about it, it might be nuts that talk to you and you can't have just a few. Or if you start really like focusing on like, I can't wait to have this chia seed pudding in the morning, that again, I had so much freedom from those thoughts. But the other thing that really showed up for me kind of simultaneously probably was more snacking. So I do still eat some grains, like brown rice and quinoa. I love sweet potatoes. But then like for my treat foods, I would say I would eat like popcorn, air popped popcorn that I'd melt like butter on, like a high quality butter. I would buy like tortilla chips as long as they don't have flour in them. And I'd have those with some guacamole or some sweet potato chips. Again, no flour or sugar in the ingredients. But still a lot of those hydrogenated, the oils that are so bad for you. And it was always a decision I made. Like, yeah, I know these oils aren't good, but I don't have it in a lot. But then all of a sudden, again, where before I could do that very infrequently. I will say my first year, I leaned more on those foods because I was just focused on it's hard enough to take out the sugar and the flour. If you got to eat a little bit of popcorn, you do what you need to do. But then like kind of year 2, 3, 4, I just found naturally, I just didn't need them as much until this last year. I realized I really was kind of, thinking about snacking more and having it every day and wanting popcorn at night when normally after dinner I don't eat. So it was really those foods and it was snacking. And I would say it was like chips and popcorn. And I was having it every day, and that's when I really knew. And then also I was noticing, and I don't know if it's because of the chips or anything. I think it was also hormonally something going on, but I did start gaining some weight. I mean, I don't think significant. I don't weigh myself, but enough that like that's been such freedom for me as I get up in the morning, I go in the closet, there's one size and it all fits like season to season. Like, it's starting to get cold and I got like, my long sleeves on today and pants and still fits. Where before that was such a stress point for me of like, oh my God, when I got the clothes out, like for the next season, what's still going to fit, what's not going to fit, or even every morning, if I had to get dressed up for something, oh, it was just an awful, awful feeling. So that's one thing I do not take for granted is being able to get up and just pull something out of a drawer and know it's going to fit. Like to me, that still feels like a miracle. So suddenly, like I'm noticing things are tight and I am starting to think again about my body and being really uncomfortable in my body again. I remember, especially like in my arms and my legs. And this summer, I remember looking because I think I have really nice legs. Like that's one body part that I like. I have muscular legs. And I'm like looking at my shorts and I'm like, my thighs used to spread out that far? Like everything just felt a little tight and uncomfortable. And for the first time, in probably like 3 or 4 years, I started feeling really uncomfortable in my skin again and very aware of my body. So that's like what you were saying again. That's why this is good therapy. You were talking about that diet mentality. It did, not realizing that till you said it. Yeah, that was creeping back in because I was suddenly like, not comfortable in my body and worried about what I looked like and worried about what was going to fit. And oh my gosh, like I remember these shorts that I wore over the summer, they were tighter and I was like, ugh. And I just really had probably like 1 or 2 months of downward spiraling with those old thoughts of, what's going to fit, what's not going to fit. And really my weight, being worried about my weight and how I looked, again, I wasn't weighing myself, but I had that diet mentality again of, well, maybe I need to eliminate something else. Maybe I need to like do intermittent fasting even more. Maybe I need to you just want to diet harder or exercise harder. So yeah, I remember telling a really good friend about that. I said, this sucks because I have not felt like this in so many years. And it's such a bad feeling to go back to where you're just not feeling good in your body. So that was really, really hard for me. And I don't know if anyone remembers like this feeling too. And I'd kind of forgotten about this, maybe that's what these little relapses are for, to like make you remember really what it was like before. Because I remember like after a binge, say like the next morning I'd woke up and I would just feel like, you have like a hangover, like a food hangover, but also like the emotional hangover is like, oh, I just hate myself. Why did I do that? Like, I feel so gross. And that's what was happening again, where I was like, okay, today I'm not going to do any snacks, no more popcorn. Like, I'm just going to not do it. And then, of course, I would have popcorn and cave. And then the next day I'd wake up with those thoughts right away again. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is exactly how it used to be. And I would feel terrible about myself. And I was basing my day and how I felt in the morning on what I ate or didn't eat the day before, which is that same behavior. So that to me was like, that's when it was like the sirens were going off, like, Siobhan, we have a problem. We need to do something. So that's when I really knew, yes, this is a big problem and I can't stop the snacking.
Are you still
trying and I can't stop?
You're still right there.
Yeah.
Oh, you're right in the
No. I'm good. I have found a solution that we can talk about.
Yes.
But no, that was kind of at the height of it. But I would say this is just in the last, like, things have just shifted for me in the past maybe month or 2 months now. I would say it's been about 2 months, but I had to get to that place again where things felt and had to realize, ooh, I don't like the way that this feels at all.
Yes.
So,
yes. Okay. What did you do? How did you get yourself out of that compulsive eating, snacking, carb loading problem?
Yeah. So I started doing just a lot of research about hormones. I knew intuitively, again, something hormonally was not right, because I shared this with you before we started recording. Like, donuts is something that really never did it for me. But suddenly I was like, I need a donut. And I'm like, this is really weird. I've never even had these cravings before. So more cravings. That's the other thing, not just snacking, but more cravings for sugar than I ever had. I remember making, because I still make my son, like, a birthday cake. I mean, talk about an act of and labor of love for someone that doesn't eat chocolate, to make your son a homemade, because I don't want to do the chemical crap. If he's going to have a cake, it's going to be made with love and all the best ingredients that I can get. So I'm making this cake for him. And I remember thinking, and I hadn't thought this ever before, I was like, I'm not going to eat this now. I felt solid on that. I'm not going to eat it now, because I knew just one bite. I know for me, I can't moderate. Some people might be able to at some point. I just know. I don't even try like that, little addictive thinking. It's like, it can't even get in, because I'm like, that's hilarious. That's so cute. You think you could have a bite of that. Like, I just shut that down. But I thought, I'm going to have this for my last meal. And then I started fantasizing about what my last meal would be. If I knew I was going to die anyway, and the sugar, who cares? I was like, I am just going to eat chocolate cake with chocolate chips and chocolate frosting, and it has to be homemade, all the things. So I'm like, that's really interesting when I'm having these thoughts. So I also at the same time found a naturopath here nearby who specializes in hormones. So I went in and made an appointment and got some blood work done. And my blood work, there is definitely some stuff going on. The other thing that was really interesting is my blood sugar, my blood glucose was way too low. I want to say it was like 63 or something, my fasting glucose, which normally it's like 78, 80. It was like really low. So I was having some reactive hypoglycemia going on too. So we addressed, like, we're starting a protocol on my gut first, which included like an herbal supplement, plus the probiotic that I have taken anyway, and then doing some castor oil packs to help detoxify. But this is what I like about a naturopath, like, very gentle approach, from the blood work. He's like, you're not absorbing the nutrients that you are taking in, right? So that suggests like a gut thing. Let's address that first and see if that helps you metabolize the hormones better. Because my hormones levels weren't like terribly off. So then we'll go do that step, but it's like a one thing at a time, instead of just throwing all this stuff on you, or here, take this antidepressant, or here, be on a birth control. Like, it's addressing the root cause, and probably the gut is the first thing that I have to address. And then at the same time, I love Dr. Mindy Pelz, and was following her. And I love, she has a new book coming out at the end of December called Fast Like a Girl. And it's all about fasting for women with their cycles. And that just clicked with me. Again, intermittent fasting isn't new to me. For the most part, I'm fasting like 14 hours, 15 hours anyway. But then to see, well, there are times of your cycle that you should be fasting and times that you shouldn't, made so much sense to me. So I really have dove into that for about 2 months now. And I will say, like, my body has rearranged itself back to the way it was. Not perfect, but back to where I feel more comfortable. The snacking has gone away completely. And I feel like that has been kind of the combination for me, but was really working with my cycle and really realizing if I am in this like hormonal flux, I'm a lot more sensitive at certain times. And one of the things that she says, like tomorrow I'll be on day 20 of my cycle. And then that's when you start from day 20 to whenever you bleed, you're eating a little bit more carbs, but not like, pasta. I mean, it's like nature's carbs. So for me now, I used to have sweet potatoes almost every day. I don't have them in that first part of my cycle when I'm more geared up to be able to fast longer and eat like less. Like I can be more ketogenic then. But in this last part of my cycle, I'm going to eat some sweet potatoes. That's when I might have some quinoa or brown rice or more vegetables. Like I'm not worried about it. And then you're just not fasting either. You are just, it's a big self-care part of the cycle. And I loved that. And so that has really worked for me. That has just put everything into place. And my body has just really responded to it in a way that I don't normally respond to things quickly. Again, first year sugar, flour free. It took even like 5 months before my weight budged at all. And it was a very dramatic change of how I had been eating. So I was like very frustrated with that at first. So I am really happy to see that my body, but also my emotions seem to be stabilizing. And it's allowing me, with this extra stress. But the other thing is I've reached out to the community that I have now for help and support, to my friends. I have an emotion code practitioner that works on me. I have a light therapist that I was seeing. I met with my shaman this morning. I mean, I have a whole, like I'm saying, I have a whole toolkit. And so I really leaned into that really heavily and had to relook at my life of like, what are you not doing? And the self-care was a big piece that I was not taking care of myself. And going through a divorce or anything like that, you've got to up that 1000%. So that is what I'm doing now, is taking more time for me every day too, and making sure, like today, before this interview, I had emotion code sessions, but I now block off 2 hours every day when I do sessions to make sure I have time to get a walk and make sure I have time to eat lunch. Where before I would just be like, oh, I'll just overlap. But putting in some of those boundaries, like I need that walk every day. That's just a non-negotiable. And I know, Florence, you like to walk too. I need to be outside, especially this time of year, because it's getting gloomier here and I get that seasonal disorder depression sometimes. So I'm like, I need, rain or shine, I need to get outside. So it's going back to some of those basics too, tightening up the food, like really looking at the food, looking at supplements, where can I tweak my supplements? And then making sure that daily self-care, whatever that is for you. I think that's the other thing. That's different for everybody. But I'm a big meditator. I like to do tapping. I like to do affirmations all before I even get out of bed in the morning. So I just like kind of doubled down on my self-care again and made sure, because I had been slipping a lot. And I think that's another, I just want to say about this with recovery and having a relapse. It might not even be snacking. I think one of the behaviors could be not doing your self-care. I think that could be the very first piece that leads to some other things, because we all know how important that is in our recovery. And I was aware from the beginning when that started to slip. And I was like, no, you don't have time for that. Like too bad, like we don't have time for that. And I kind of pushed it away. So maybe had I addressed the self-care right away, maybe the snacking wouldn't have been such an issue. I don't know. But my body, if I had listened, was trying to tell me it needed more, and I didn't listen. So I do think that can be very, very, and I hear this from other clients too, that self-care piece a lot of times starts slipping. And that is, I think, really critical on it. It can slip maybe a day, but you have to be right back on it the next day. I can't go more than like 2 days without meditating, or the wheels start falling apart. And you'll find that for yourself too. Whatever that is, that's going to look different for all of us. But for me, I know that to be true now from my own experience. So I would say that is the other thing, and blocking out some really big things for me that are going to fill me up so that I'm not looking for outside things to fill me up. Usually there's some kind of void that we're trying to fill. And I had a lot of sadness and grief. And I say this all the time too. I still don't like feeling those hard emotions. I have a lot of work around this and a lot of practice, but it's really hard to sit and just feel the full extent of some of these really tough feelings. And so just kind of reminding myself, I have to do that too. It's okay to be not okay a little bit and not have to reach for the comfort right away, because I have found the more I struggle against the hard feeling, the more it, what you resist persists, like that kind of thing, where if I accept it, feel into it, give it a little love, I usually feel better faster. But I think this is so interesting how it doesn't matter that I'm almost 5 years in recovery. My protective instincts were still like food, 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 food. That's what it wanted to go back to. Even with all the rewiring I've probably have done in these years, that was still like that basic instinct that came back to me when my body was probably just trying to protect me because I was going through such a hard time. So yeah, I am very, very grateful to have all of those things again come together the way they needed to, because intermittent fasting is something I've experimented with before that didn't really work. I don't think I was ready for it. I think I was too early in the recovery, where now seems to be a time and in the way that I'm doing it that works for me personally. So that was really, really a key and something that I'm going to, continue now to investigate. So I go back to the doctor in December, to the naturopath, to get my blood labs again. And I'll be very curious to see what shifts have happened.
Yeah, it's amazing. Oh my gosh. And just because I'm a woman walking the path of recovery. I coach in this space. I've been doing this for, embarrassingly almost 30 years. I can hear all of the wisdom in what you're saying, right? Like I know what it's like to let the self-care slip and have it set you up to go back to food and to it takes a while before you're like, I don't want this. You hit your new bottom, you kick back into gear. I want to go back to where I was. It felt better. And yes, amazing. Wow. There's so much in this.
And just one other thing that I kind of want to say in case anyone needs to hear this too. I don't know, but like going back to like the divorce and kind of, we were talking about relationships when you got off sugar and stuff. Like one thing that, because I really didn't want that for my kids, again, like I'm saying, no one's like, I hope I get married and get divorced. That's what every person dreams of. But I remember there was a point that I was really, because I wanted to make sure it wasn't the addiction, wanting something new, better. Like I was very aware of that, and I did a lot of counseling and therapy around that. So I was very aware. I knew it wasn't that. And one of the big things I realized was that in order for me to continue that lifestyle for me, and a big part of relationship comes down to the lifestyle, right? Wanting the same lifestyle. And that's where I'd say we're kind of different lifestyles. But I realized I probably could do it if I went back to sugar and flour. And that's when I was like, nope, absolutely not, though. I'm not willing to pay that cost. That is not okay. Because that is, again, self-betrayal to who I really am. And it's going to dim my light again. And I don't want to go back there. So I just want to say, say that too with things. If there's anything that you feel like, oh, the only way I'm gonna be able to deal with this is sugar and flour and, getting, that is a little like cautionary, like red flag, right? So, and that was one of the because it took me a while to finally make the decision and make peace with the decision. I had to go through a lot of different things, but that was a big part of letting go finally, was again, knowing I had a choice that I could go back, but just realizing I can't.
Yes. And how many other areas of our lives have we been using sugar and flour to shut down and to silence and to make the intolerable tolerable, right?
Exactly.
To make the unacceptable acceptable, just so we can keep working, keep giving to our employers, or stay in relationships that we know don't feel right, but the sugar can make us keep moving forward. Yeah.
I hear that a lot about work, where people change jobs too, because they can no longer do their job without the help of some kind of substance, and that's when they really know, yeah, it's not working. So yeah, this isn't just relationships, like you're saying, it's any area of our lives.
It's almost like we become very sensitive to toxins across from mental, physical, relational. I know that I no longer watch the news. I just cannot. And how many people in this space are?
Me neither.
Exactly.
I cannot. And I even take it off the news app off my phone. I had to take it off my phone. So yes, sometimes I'm like the last to know things, but yeah, way too sensitive to that. So
and it's really common. I know most of us in this space, we used to be able to tolerate things, numb them down, or shut down. But now that we don't have food doing that for us, we just are so much more mindful of what feels good and what doesn't. And
exactly. Yeah. Way more in touch with that than I used to be. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. This was an amazing interview, Siobhan. And it's so fun that you're in this space, because you know what? We could do another one a year from now and they'll see, where is she at now? And
we should. I would like to know. And sometimes I think that too. It's a good coping mechanism. It's just like, where do I want to be in a year? And then that's when I am going through a hard time. I think about that. Where do you want to
be a year from now? If you had a little magic wand and could wave it, what's one thing that you would love to see a year from now be in your life?
I think what I'm really working on and what I'm trying to manifest here, and what has been a huge void in my life, I've lived in the Pacific Northwest since 2009 and have always felt like a fish out of water. First in Seattle, now Portland. I have like some friends, but not my tribe. That's what I would like. I would like a tribe here. I have a great friends, great support system spread out all over, but I want my tribe here in Portland. That is what I would like to. If we came back in a year and I'm telling you about this tribe, I will be thrilled that I found that.
So, we're all putting that out for you. What does it mean to say you have your tribe? What does that mean?
Just like maybe, and it doesn't, that community and local, that I can go and see someone, call them up, like, I need to see you right now, and rely on each other. Like, hey, can you help out with the kids? Like that kind of thing, where it's a day-to-day connection, where we are doing things. It's like my family in Portland. This is the other thing, now that I'm going through a divorce, my husband and his family are here. My mom just moved back to the East Coast. She was living here, and that's a huge loss for me, huge. So also, by the way, put that in there with the divorce, finding out that my mom was moving, and then the hormone stuff. Like, it was a total tornado for a while. So now that I've lost some of that, I want to recreate this new family. And honestly, if it weren't for my kids, I wouldn't choose to live in the Pacific Northwest, but I'm going to be here because I want to be with them. So how can I make this the best possible experience for me? Like, that's what I'm focused on now. And if I could create that community, that's what that means to me, this tribe of people that just feels like home, so that for the first time I can feel like home here, because that has just been something I have not felt, and I think is so critical for all of us. So, and I think that will help my recovery too, so much, having that support and tribe behind me. It's just those people that are advocating for you, that are supporting you, that are there on the day-to-day basis, in person too. I just think there's something to that in person.
Oh, definitely. I love it. Very clear. We're putting that out for you, Siobhan. Thank you.
Thank you.
Time and your light.
Thanks. Yes. Thank you so much.
Thanks everybody for tuning in today. Hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. Thanks for tuning in this week. If you would like more interviews, more information, and more inspiration on how to break up with sugar, go to my YouTube channel, Kick Sugar Coach, or my website, kicksugarcoach.com. See you next week.